Welcome to the best of first-person episodes from Phantoms and Monsters. Please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you'll be notified of all future uploads.
Stalked in the neighborhood. All I know is that the encounter I experienced frightened me so much that even after all these years, it still shakes me up to think about it. Until that evening, I have always thought of werewolves as being nothing more than just fairy tales, but that first encounter has left a huge question mark inside of me. I come from a family of skeptics, so I decided not to tell anyone about what happened to me. Then one night my brother came home trembling and pale. He told me about his experience, and I felt relieved that I wasn't the only one that seen something. It was after 10 p.m. on New Year's Eve in the late 1980s. It was either 1987 or 88. I was sitting out front of my parents' home, and instead of going out with my friends, I decided to stay home and celebrate the new year with my family. My father's car was parked in front of the house by the road, so I decided to sit on the hood, smoke a cigarette and wait until midnight. The rest of my family was in the house celebrating. After about an hour I heard a strange sound coming from the neighbor's yard across the street. It sounded as though a man was moaning in pain. The street and the property were dark, so I couldn't see much, except for a small light that shined off in the distance on the back part of the property along a cinder block wall. The wall where the light was sitting wasn't finished yet. The whole property itself was wooded with trees and tall bushes. The bushes on the property stood around 5 foot high and over and around 5 foot in width. I kept looking in the direction of the sound to try and see what was causing it. My first thought was that maybe someone was hurt, but then the sound changed. It went from a moaning to a low-pitched gurgling, then growling. The next thing I hear is a large thud, as though something huge jumped and landed behind one of the bushes in the back part of the property. The sounds that followed were the sounds of something seriously heavy, on all four legs darting behind large bushes moving towards me in a zigzag pattern. I started questioning myself as to what the heck this thing was. Was it a horse or dog, because it sounded so heavy and I could hear its breath when its feet hit the ground as it came closer. I heard the growling again, and it was like no dog I had ever heard. It was at this point that reality hit me, and I realized that this thing was coming towards me. I suddenly felt the rush of fear go right through me. It stopped behind a huge berry bush that was across the street from me, which was about 15 to 20 feet away. It suddenly became quiet and I couldn't hear the breathing or the growling anymore. I eased myself down off of the hood of the car, because I didn't want to make any sudden movements, especially since it was so close. The front door was about 30 feet away from where I was at, and I didn't know if I would make it. I didn't know what this thing was and I didn't want to find out. I was so scared I could hardly breathe. My parents had a lot of bushes and trees in their front yard as well, so I noticed a gap in between a couple of them and I started running. As soon as I started running, that thing started coming after me. I could hear it behind me as it came across the street. I heard its nails scraping the asphalt once or twice as it crossed onto our property. I was not about to look back, and as soon as I reached the front steps I jumped to the top step and quickly ran into the house and locked the door. I was shaking so bad that I felt like I was going to pass out. Even with the music playing inside the house, I heard the thing outside the front door growling, and then it went quiet. I heard another thud as though it jumped off the step onto the grass, and I couldn't hear it anymore. Suddenly, I heard my brother-in-law speak over my shoulder asking me what I was looking at. I jumped and thought I was going to choke on my own words. All I said to him was that whatever he did, do not go outside. He started smiling and said okay. I guess he thought I was joking, but then he realized I wasn't. As soon as I took a couple steps away from the door, he opened the door and went outside to check, but didn't go down the steps. He quickly came back in and didn't say anything. I asked him if he saw anything and he said there was nothing there. I didn't tell anyone about it. Not even my brother-in-law. Later that night around 12:30 a.m., after everything quieted down, I was in the kitchen drying dishes when I heard the most terrible snarling growl right outside the window where I was standing. I suddenly dropped the plate I was holding and it shattered on the floor. The fear crept back and I started trembling again, realizing that the thing was still outside, but it was along the side of the house towards the back and not the front. I backed away staring at the window, but it was pitch black outside, and I couldn't see anything. My mother came into the kitchen and complained about me dropping her plate. I still didn't say anything because I didn't think my family would believe me. I did tell my father that I thought I saw someone outside looking into the window. He grabbed his gun and went outside with my brother-in-law and yelled, trying to scare them away. It must have left after that because they didn't see anything. Until now, my sister was the only one that knew only part of my story. Marilyn.
A werewolf in Florida. It was June. I think around 9 p.m. I was out back on the patio. At that time no one had fences around their property because all of us knew the others' families around the area. The only exception was the family across the street from us. They had a 7-foot-tall cinder block wall behind their house. They had a large wooded piece of property and kept equipment out there. The dad was in construction and the wall enclosed 3 sides of the property. It was hot out and a slight breeze, no clouds and starry. As I sat there you could hear the dogs in the neighborhood begin to bark, then everything got quiet. A lone howl started, so I howled back. I do this rather well. I'd watch National Geographic and would mimic wolf cries. Anyway, this went on for about 5 minutes, each time the howl from the other end got closer. Down the road are train tracks that run north to south. The sound seemed to come from that direction. I started to get spooked as the howling stopped. Our yard had bushes and a tree on the side where the sound came from. The hair on my arms and neck started to stand up, so I felt like I should go in. As I stood I heard movement by the bushes. I glanced over and saw something move. I didn't wait to see what it was, so I booked it into the house, and I stood by the door which had glass panes in it. I watched as something very large and dark moved about the bushes. It moved away and I could no longer see it from my vantage point. I went to the front porch to look out the windows, hoping to get a look at whatever was there, but it never came out that way. So I went to bed and to read for a while to calm down. About less than an hour later my brother came home. He came to my room and as white as paper. He was shaking all over, his eyes the size of saucers. I asked him if he was okay. Now my brother is the sort that has an explanation for anything unusual, and he's a big guy, so for him to be in this state was not normal. He said, "I need you to come with me right now, I'll explain when we get in the truck." I was still dressed, so I got up and went with him. When we got outside I asked what's going on. He told me there was something in the road by the tracks he needed to show me first. I was not happy about that as I just had my own experience with something from that way. As we got there it looked as if something had exploded all over the road. There was blood everywhere as if something was mowed down in that spot, but there was no body parts anywhere. My brother related then what he had seen coming down the road. I was coming home and as I got closer to the tracks, there was this huge thing lying in the road. I thought it must have been a Mastiff or Great Dane in the road, but as I pulled up to it, it didn't look like a dog I'd ever seen. It was hairy, its head and nose was twice the size of a dog. The body wasn't a dog, just dog-like, but much, much bigger. It was all over the place. There was an arm on the road. Not dog, a human arm. There was no trace of anything when we got there, and it was only minutes that it took us to get there. I said to get the hell out of there now and we went back home. I told him what I experienced just before he got home. A couple of days later my sister came to me and said she has been seeing a large dog prowling around at night. It was huge and she had seen it across the street as she sat on the porch. I told her what my brother and I saw and not to be outside alone until we could find out what it was. We got together and decided to stake out the yard over the next night. Sure enough, it was back in the neighbor's yard. This thing was about the size of a Shetland pony, black in color. We had flashlights and turned them on. It took off to the back wall behind the house. Their dog was going off like crazy. They had a small terrier. We watched this dog thing scale the wall. The neighbor came out to see what was going on, and we shouted there was something in his yard. He went back in and grabbed his pistol and went around back, but by that time it was gone. Michelle.
Large cryptid werewolf encountered near Jacutinga-MG, Brazil. I'm 20 years old and I live in Brazil, Sao Paulo state. What I'm going to tell here happened to me in the year 2017 here in my city. A friend, who I'll call Thiago, made me an invitation to spend a day at his father's place. My city is just outside Jacutinga-MG, Brazil. It was a Saturday and I went with him in the morning. We had a really nice day. We had a barbecue, swam, ate fruit, talked and helped his father to prune other trees. It was really cool. When it got dark at night, around 10 p.m., Thiago's father asked us to leave. His father had a Fiorino Das anti-gas pickup truck. We were both in the bucket, sitting talking. We sat with our backs to the cabin's rear window, looking back. We had already gone about a kilometer. The two of them there, looking at the road, towards the back of the truck. When his father slowed down to go through a tunnel, he came up behind a tall black shape, quickly. I thought it was a very big dog with a bright eye. At the time we commented, "What is it? What animal is that?" It stood, like a person, on top of that ravine. It was looking towards us and was about 40 or 50 meters from the truck, which was moving away. We looked at each other and very scared and confused. Then we looked back at the animal. Then, the animal was standing on 4 legs again, and ran down the ravine towards the road. When he reached the side of the road, in the rush downhill, he jumped the other way, crossing the entire road into the opposite ravine. Thiago tells me, that is a werewolf. The werewolf began to follow and parallel the truck through the woods. He went through the woods, we saw leaves and branches flying, we heard the branches breaking, and we saw him passing among the trees. So Thiago asked his father to speed up, because there was something following the car. The father asked, "What is it?" And he said, "I think it's a werewolf." Soon, we arrived at the river, and crossed a narrow bridge. I don't know why, but he didn't cross the river, and he stayed up there on the bank, watching us, until he disappeared from view at the curve. I had never seen or believed that there was a werewolf, despite hearing stories from my parents and grandparents. Now I avoid going to the countryside at night. What marked me most in this story was the jump. A fantastic jump from one side of the road to the other. And me and Thiago seeing everything from Fiorino's bucket. If it weren't for the river, that werewolf might have jumped on Fiorino to catch us. MP.
This is Lon Strickler. If you like this program, it would help us if you would give it a thumbs up. Then subscribe and click the bell icon so you get notification when we upload new first-person encounters. We have many more to come very soon. And by the way, if you have a suggestion or an experience of your own, please leave a comment.